The stagecoach rumbled across the endless Wyoming plains, dust swirling in the golden light of dusk. Inside, Clara sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding as if it knew she didn't belong. The letter she held had promised a new beginning, a man waiting for her, a home, and maybe a chance at love. But when the stage finally creaked to a halt in front of the small post station, the man who came to meet her frowned the moment he saw her face. "You're older than I expected," he said, his disappointment poorly hidden. Clara's chest tightened. "I told your agency my age," she said softly. 42. The man, a rancher named Mr. Thompson, shook his head. "They said 32. I needed someone younger, someone who could give me children." He muttered an apology, turned on his heel, and walked away. The driver cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, seems we'll be headin' back tomorrow." That night, Clara sat alone on the porch of the post station, listening to the wind hum through the prairie grass. She had spent her life caring for her father and brothers, then their children. When they all passed, she sold what little she had to make this journey, hoping to start again, even if late. Now, she was being sent back like a returned parcel, unwanted and forgotten. The next morning, she was about to climb back into the stagecoach when another man rode up, a tall figure on a dark horse, his hat pulled low, his beard dusted with gray. He dismounted slowly, his eyes steady on her. "You the lady Mr. Thompson sent back?" he asked. Clara hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "Yes," she said. "Seems I wasn't what he wanted." The man studied her quietly, his gaze thoughtful, not unkind. "Name's Jack Colton," he said at last. "I run the Double C Ranch about 15 miles west. I came here for supplies, but," his voice softened, "I reckon I found something else I wasn't expectin'." She blinked. "Sir," he smiled faintly. "A woman with eyes that don't lie. You look like you've lived, ma'am. That's worth more than all the youth in the world." Clara didn't know what to say. Men didn't talk like that, not to women like her. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Then let me fix that," he said simply. "Come with me. Not as a mail-order bride, not as a bargain. Just be mine." She stared at him, unsure if he was teasing. But there was no jest in his tone, only quiet sincerity. Something inside her trembled, the part that had stopped believing she deserved to be wanted. Jack helped her onto his horse, his hands firm but gentle. As they rode across the open plains, she felt the wind tug at her shawl and realized she hadn't felt that alive in years. The sky stretched forever above them, vast and blue and free. At the ranch, Jack showed her around, a wide stretch of land framed by cottonwoods, a barn smelling of hay, and a little white house with a porch that creaked like an old song. "Ain't much," he said. "But it's honest. Been lonely too long." Clara touched the railing, worn smooth by years of weather. "It feels like home already," she murmured. Days turned to weeks. Clara helped in the kitchen, the garden, the barn. She baked pies for the ranch hands, mended shirts, and sometimes played the old piano in the parlor when the evenings grew quiet. The men on the ranch began to respect her, her steady hands, her gentle humor, her way of making a house feel alive again. Jack watched her, day by day, his admiration deepening. He didn't rush her, didn't try to claim her. He just shared his days, fixing fences, breaking horses, talking under the stars. One night, as they sat by the fire, he finally said, "You know, I sent for a bride once too. She never came. Maybe it's for the best. Seems God was waitin' for me to meet you instead." Clara looked into his eyes, the firelight flickering gold in his gaze. "You deserve someone younger," she said quietly, the old insecurity rising again. He shook his head. "No, I deserve someone real. You've got the kind of beauty that doesn't fade, Clara. The kind that holds a man together when the world comes apart." Her eyes filled, and for the first time, she let him see her tears. He took her hand, rough and warm against her trembling fingers, and said softly, "I don't care how many birthdays you've had. I just care that you're here." That winter, snow blanketed the ranch in white silence. Jack caught pneumonia after rescuing a calf trapped in the creek. Clara sat by his bedside, spooning broth into his lips, praying through the long nights. When he finally opened his eyes, pale but smiling, he whispered, "Didn't think I'd wake to see an angel." She laughed through her tears. "You're no saint, Jack Colton." "No," he said hoarsely, "but I've been saved all the same." When spring came, wildflowers bloomed over the hills like spilled paint. One morning, Jack hitched up the wagon and told Clara to come with him. He drove her to the small chapel in town, where the pastor waited with a shy grin. "I told him I was tired of livin' alone," Jack said, turning to her. "And tired of waitin' to call you mine." Tears welled in her eyes. "You mean it." "Every word." He slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger, rough from work but shining in the light. And when he kissed her, slow, reverent, and sure, the years between them melted like snow in sunlight. They didn't have a grand wedding. No flowers, no audience, no music but the sound of wind through the open door. But when Jack whispered, "I choose you," it was enough to fill every empty place inside her. From that day on, Clara was no longer the woman sent back. She was the heart of the Double C Ranch, the one who kept the fire burning, who laughed in the kitchen, who stood beside her husband as they watched the sun set over their land. And when neighbors whispered that she was too old, Jack only smiled and said, "Funny thing about time, it don't matter much when love shows up right on schedule." Every evening, they'd sit on the porch, hands entwined, the prairie stretching endlessly before them. The same wind that once carried her dreams away now carried them back, softly, gently, into the arms of the man who had seen her not as a mistake, but as a miracle. The seasons passed slowly on the Double C Ranch, each one weaving new colors into the tapestry of Clara and Jack's life together. The spring that followed their quiet wedding was one of the most beautiful Wyoming had seen in years. The creeks ran full and cold from the melting snows, the air was thick with the scent of sage and lilac, and the prairie grass shimmered like spun silk in the sunlight. Clara took to waking before dawn, her steps quiet on the wooden floor as she stoked the fire and brewed coffee. She'd watch the first streaks of pink and gold rise over the horizon, wrapping herself in a shawl Jack had bought her in town. Sometimes, he would come up behind her, half awake, wrapping his arms around her waist, his voice rumbling softly against her ear. "Mornin', Mrs. Colton," he'd murmur, his breath warm on her neck. "Mornin', Mr. Colton," she'd reply with a smile, her heart still fluttering at the sound of those words. The ranch was alive again. The hands joked more, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and laughter, and Jack's old hound, Rusty, seemed to wag his tail a little harder these days. Clara brought a peace to the place that no one could explain, and even the men who'd once doubted her presence began to see her as the heart of the ranch. But life on the prairie was never without its tests. That summer, a drought rolled in, the kind that cracked the earth and turned grass to dust. The creeks dried to thin threads, the cattle grew restless, and the sky, once brilliant blue, hung white and still like an empty promise. Jack rode out each morning before sunrise, checking on the herds, his face lined with worry. One afternoon, Clara found him sitting on the porch steps, his hat in his hands, his shirt damp with sweat. She poured him a cup of water and knelt beside him. "How bad?" she asked quietly. He sighed, staring out at the horizon. "We're down to one good well. If the rain don't come soon, we'll have to sell half the herd." Clara took his hand. "You've worked too hard to lose it all." He looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It ain't the land I'm scared of losin' anymore." She pressed his hand to her heart. "You won't lose me, Jack. Not ever." That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Clara went to her knees beside the window and prayed. She wasn't a woman given to long words or bold faith, but her voice trembled with hope as she whispered into the darkness. And as if heaven had been waiting to hear her, rain came before dawn, heavy, cleansing, unstoppable. Jack woke to the sound of it drumming on the roof. He rushed outside, laughing like a boy, holding his hat to the sky. Clara followed him, barefoot and breathless, her skirt soaked as he spun her around in the downpour. For a moment, they were just two souls dancing in the rain, their laughter echoing through the valley. The drought broke, and with it came new life. Grass returned, calves were born, and the ranch began to thrive again. Word spread through the nearby towns about the couple at the Double C, about the woman who'd been sent back but had become the pride of the plains. In autumn, they hosted a harvest supper for the neighboring ranchers. The long table on the porch was covered with pies, roasted meats, and vegetables from Clara's garden. Lanterns swung in the cool wind, and fiddles played as people ate and danced under the stars. Midway through the evening, a man Clara didn't recognize approached her. He was tall, clean-shaven, and wore a city coat that didn't fit the dust and sweat of the land. "Mrs. Colton," he said with a polite nod, You wouldn't remember me, but I work with the agency that sent you west. I came across your name again recently. Her breath caught. The agency. He smiled, though there was a trace of guilt in it. Yes, ma'am. I remember when you were returned. A misunderstanding in the paperwork, I was told. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Clara looked past him to where Jack was laughing with the ranch hands, the firelight soft on his face. You don't have to be, she said. If I hadn't been sent back, I'd never have found him. The man tipped his hat, his expression wistful. Then maybe it was fate that got the better of us all. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the fire had burned low, Clara sat beside Jack on the porch steps. He handed her a cup of cider, his fingers brushing hers. You looked beautiful tonight, he said. She chuckled. In this old dress. He leaned closer, his voice low. It's not the dress, sweetheart. It's the woman wearing it. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the last embers fade into the night. Do you ever think, she whispered, what if things had gone differently? If I hadn't been sent back. He smiled softly. Then maybe I'd still be sittin' out here alone, wonderin' what was missin'. And you'd still be waitin' for a letter that never came. Sometimes the wrong road's the only one that leads home. Winter came again, harsh and cold, but inside the little house, the fire never went out. Clara and Jack spent the long nights reading by the hearth. Or simply talking. She told him stories of her childhood in Missouri, the sound of the church bell on Sundays, the way her father carved wooden birds for her. Jack told her about the early years on the ranch, when he'd lost more cattle than he'd kept, and how he'd built everything from nothing but grit and stubbornness. One evening, he took a small wooden box from the mantel and handed it to her. Inside was a tiny carved horse, no bigger than her thumb. Made it my first winter here, he said shyly. Wasn't much to keep me company then. Figured it's yours now. She held it gently, her throat tight. You kept this all these years. He nodded. Guess I was waitin' for the right hands to hold it. By spring, the ranch had doubled in size. Jack had taken on more men, and Clara had started a small schoolhouse on Sundays for the ranchers' children. She taught them their letters, told them stories, and always ended with a song. The children adored her, especially a small girl named Elsie, whose mother had died the year before. One afternoon, Elsie came running up to Clara as she hung laundry on the line. Miss Clara, she said breathlessly, my pa says I should bring you this. She handed her a bundle of wildflowers. He says you make the ranch feel like it's got a heart again. Clara knelt, her eyes soft. Tell your pa he's kind. And thank you, sweetheart. These are beautiful. When Jack came home that evening, he found Clara pressing the flowers between pages of her old Bible. What's that for? He asked. She smiled. For the children who remind me what it means to start over. But not all days were easy. One night, a storm tore through the valley, ripping fences and flooding the lower pasture. Jack was thrown from his horse trying to save the herd. He came home limping, his leg bleeding badly. Clara tore her apron to make a bandage, her hands steady even as her heart trembled. You fool man, she whispered, tears streaking her face as she wrapped the wound. You'll ride yourself into the grave if I let you. He winced but managed a smile. Reckon it'd take more than a storm to get rid of me. For days, she sat by his bedside, tending to him, reading aloud when he couldn't sleep. When he finally stood again, leaning on her shoulder, he said, you know, I used to think I built this ranch with my hands. Now I know it's you holding it together. Years passed quietly after that, marked by the rhythm of harvests and sunsets. They celebrated their 5th anniversary under the same stars where he'd first asked her to be his. Jack gave her a locket that night, inside of which was a faded photograph, her face and his, side by side, smiling. I had the photographer in town fix this, he said. Wanted something to remind me that time can't touch what's true. Clara's eyes filled as she whispered, you've given me a life I never thought I'd have. He brushed her tears away. You gave it to yourself, sweetheart. I just got lucky enough to walk beside you. Their story became legend in those parts. The woman who was too old for one man but perfect for another. The couple who weathered droughts, storms, and years with grace and laughter. Folks came from miles around to see the ranch that love built. As the years deepened, their hair silvered and their pace slowed, but their bond only grew stronger. Jack still called her his girl, even when her hands trembled as she poured his coffee. On quiet evenings, they'd sit by the porch, watching the horizon fade into twilight. Sometimes, she'd hum a tune from her youth, and he'd close his eyes, letting the sound carry him somewhere soft and endless. One day, as they walked the pasture together, Clara stopped suddenly, her breath catching. "Do you remember," she said, looking toward the old trail, "that morning I almost left? When the stagecoach was waiting?" He nodded, his voice gentle. "I remember seeing a woman standin' there with more courage than she knew." She smiled faintly. "I was terrified. And yet you stayed." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the veins on her skin. "That's what makes you braver than any man I know." That night, the sky blazed with stars. Jack built a fire outside and made coffee the old way, in a tin pot over the flames. They sat close, wrapped in a shared blanket. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Come in here, talkin' a chance on an old rancher." She turned to him, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Never. You're the only man who ever looked at me and didn't see what I'd lost. You saw what I had left to give." He kissed her hand, then her forehead. "And you gave me everything." Time went on. The Double C grew prosperous under their care. Children who'd once learned in Clara's schoolhouse grew up to run ranches of their own, and many returned just to sit with the Coltons, listening to their stories. Clara would laugh and say, "It's not much of a story. Just a woman who took the wrong road and found the right man." But to those who listened, it was more than that. It was proof that love doesn't measure years, it measures courage, kindness, and the quiet faith to begin again when the world says you're done. And on the plains of Wyoming, where the wind still whispered through the grass, people said you could sometimes see them, an old rancher and his wife, sitting side by side on the porch, hand in hand, watching the sun set on the life they built together from nothing but second chances and steadfast hearts.